Hello, if you just joined us, feel free to put your location in the chat box and what made you today. I'm just going to give folks a few more moments because it looks like we got people still coming in. Oh, good. We're getting some action in the chat box. Okay. Confidence and leadership, moving along with the new me. Okay, let me get going because I really like to stay on time here because these sessions are meant to be high impact, but also in a short amount of time. So my name is Dr. Anise Fisher. I'm the founder and CEO of Developing Capacity Coaching. Welcome to our open access webinar, Standing in Your Authority, How to Lead Without Shrinking. I'm so excited to jump into the conversation to share with you some of the strategies that we've used in our own practice with reducing imposter syndrome in leaders. Before I get started, I always like to start with a land, labor, and solidarity acknowledgement. I am on the council of Three Fires Land in the city of Chicago. We stand in solidarity as an organization with the ending of all forms of oppression against all groups. In particular, we always give a labor acknowledgement for enslaved peoples who built the foundation of this country, as well as acknowledging our Chinese immigrants, our Mexican immigrants who were often exploited in the process of building some key infrastructures in our country. And so we believe that in order to create a socially just world, it's important for us to be in solidarity with others. So even if I don't understand what you're going through, I'm going to try to create a world where you are heard, seen, and respected. For those who don't know about us, Developing Capacity Coaching, we've been around for almost 8 years. I've been doing the work of leadership development for over 20. The main focus of our organization is to expand the capacity of leaders to do good. We operate in a variety of different contexts, but people meet us around 4 parts of their journey. Usually they're trying to transform personal leadership. So that's the work that we do around executive coaching. You're going to experience some of that work that we focus on with imposter syndrome that we integrated into our coaching curriculum. We partner with organizations with pre-established teams like boards, employee resource groups, dialogue groups to really help build solid infrastructures for them and so that they are able to work with each other in fair and just manners. Shift org culture work, just think of that as we want to come in and deal with everything. We've been doing a lot of work in that area with governments and educational institutions, and then data-informed decision-making. So we integrate data into everything that we do. We believe that it's important for us to know what's happening before we go into an organization and come alongside them. So I want to launch a poll here, so bear with me before we hop in to talk about imposter syndrome. Now, the poll is anonymous. Can you all see the poll? Okay, I'm gonna launch it. Go ahead and take a few moments to answer these questions. It's very quick. It's no trick. There's no right or wrong answer. I just want to get a sense of where folks are. In the last 3 months, how often have you participated in these behaviors? And then I want you to think about in the last 3 months, how often you've experienced these different types of behaviors. Is everyone able to see the poll? Okay. So question 1, if you aren't able to, there we go. Make it a little bigger for folks. Okay. Okay, I'm gonna give folks about 10 more seconds before I close out the poll. Okay. Looks like we're getting some action here. And I wanted to start off with the poll just to get a sense of, where are people coming into the space? This is a webinar, but we intentionally use the meeting function of Zoom so that it can be more of a roundtable space versus someone speaking at you and you can't see other people. Okay, so let's end the poll and share the results. So can folks see the share? So the first question was, in the last 3 months, how often have you participated in one of these behaviors? When you know the answer, you say, I think, I may, maybe, I'm not sure. In the last 3 months, how often have you participated in one of these behaviors? It looks like we had a number of people saying holding back from stepping into positions of influence, even though you are perfectly equipped. The question in the last 3 months, how often have you dismissed a new opportunity out of doubting your readiness? We had 6 out of 7. And then in the last 3 months, how often have you obsessed over / worried that, and it seems like someone would find out information that would doubt their belief in your capabilities. Well, thank you all for participating. I want to continue with saying that you are not alone in your experience. Can everyone see my screen that says love and trust and fear and doubt? And part of what we're going to talk about today is that sometimes we lead out of fear and doubt, where we question whether or not we're truly enough. And that is some of the indicators that you saw with imposter syndrome. But sometimes we lead out of love and trust, which means we believe ourselves, we know we're enough. You can't tell us anything. We're going to move full speed ahead and we're going to try all of the things that we want to try in our particular roles. And what we found in talking about imposter syndrome, and really why I zone in on this in our coaching practice, is that we just saw leaders leading from a place of fear and doubt and really trying to get underneath what was going on and why in some meetings, in some places and spaces, they showed up in the fullness of their self, and in other areas they did not. So what we believe is that imposter syndrome really is fueled by this concept of fear and doubt, and it pulls us away from what we're naturally good at. It pulls us away from our strengths, and it really begins to set in these automatic negative thoughts that sends us into this, downward spiral where we look at ourselves from a deficit mindset. And so we're going to talk a little bit about the 4 of the 10 indicators that we use to support people around imposter syndrome. And then we'll spend some time talking about what are some ways for you to move with much more confidence and trust in your leadership. So imposter syndrome, and the way we define it, it's this circular replay of self-limiting beliefs. And I imagine you all have experienced this before, where you are in a meeting, you're in a phone call, you're in interaction with someone, and this thought comes in your head and it starts to play on some of those things that we talked about, which is, the answer to something, but you say, I think, or I may, or you put a disclaimer before you. It sometimes make you feel like you don't belong, right? Does anybody agree with me? You can use your natural hand or emojis. If I'm saying something that connects with you, you got to talk back to me here. So you can be in the chat box or use an emoji, but you feel like you don't belong. It makes you, sort of feel like I'm not supposed to be here, or that my achievement was an accident, but we know that that's not true because we've all worked hard. But it also makes us feel like sometimes that what we have can be taken away from us at any given moment. And that's what we saw in that last response. And at the heart of this imposter syndrome is this fear and living in a constant state of being found out, or this vacillating between worrying and hiding. And you're going to see pictures here of a variety of people of backgrounds, because imposter syndrome just doesn't impact women. It impacts everybody in many different ways. Now, I would be remiss not to share this because I think it's an important clarification with imposter syndrome. The nature of oppression in our society can fuel imposter syndrome. And the reality is that, if we are in a space where, oppression is present, oppression is a system of advantage and disadvantage based on identity. So if we just look at these marginalized groups, I'll just use myself for an example, as a Black woman, I could be very confident in areas of my life outside of my job. But because when I get to my job, I'm having experiences where people are wanting me to conform, change my hair, change the way I speak, not to show up in the fullness of my gifts. And I'm pressured to conform so that I can gain access to opportunities. That's what oppression is. There's a system of advantage or disadvantage. And we say beneficiaries of bias because the reason why these groups are benefiting is because marginalized groups are experiencing bias in multiple areas of their life. I couldn't talk about imposter syndrome and not talk about this dynamic, because the reality is that, there are times when we go into different parts of our society. You might be a trans person and there's a pressure to conform at your job. And so you may be perfectly fine showing up in the fullness of your brilliance and power outside of your job. But when you get there, you start noticing, people are treating you differently. So I put this here because it's important for us to pay attention to our work environments, to ensure that we are creating work environments where all people from all backgrounds have access to opportunities in our organizations. And that if someone is sharing with you that they're experiencing imposter syndrome and they believe it's a result of their identity, then I want to really encourage you to take a moment and hear the person out and make sure that's not the case. Okay, back to my previously scheduled talk, but I couldn't not talk about that as a group of us together. One of the ways that imposter syndrome shows up is by second guessing your brilliance. And let me know if this is you. Someone poses a question in the meeting and you say, I think, or maybe, or I'm not sure if this is right. How many of you have seen that in practice? Because I don't want you to out yourself. You can just raise your hand or put it in the chat box. Maybe you did it. It could have been your friend next to you. But you see this happening where you're second guessing your brilliance. You know the answer. You've studied these things before. You probably could write the master class on the topic, but it shows up in us second guessing ourselves. And so part of what we say here is that this is one of the biggest manifestations we see of people, and folks don't often think it's imposter syndrome, but what's often underneath it is this belief that, people are going to pick at my intelligence, or someone's not going to believe that I really know what I know. And again, that goes into that fear because you're not trusting yourself in the moment. The next thing is hiding expertise. So this is, the question that we had on the survey, where people don't step into positions of influence, even though you're perfectly equipped to handle it. And what we found in our work is due to mass of people feeling that they're not worthy of this opportunity. But that you have the expertise. Again, you've studied, this information, but you might choose to be silent in a meeting. Now, sometimes we kind of step back because we don't want people to put all the work on us. So I'm not talking about that time. I'm talking about that you have been made for this moment, but you just kind of step back and you don't allow your brilliance to show. And I talk about this in form of brilliance because I really mean this to all of you that are on this and who will listen to it later. I believe that brilliance has nothing to do with the degree. Brilliance has everything to do with people who have had a lived experience on this earth, and you have paid attention to things going on around you in the world, and you have worked hard, and you have created spaces for you to gain knowledge. I don't think brilliance is connected to a degree. And sometimes, I don't know if you all see this in your workplaces, but we partner with people where they have folks, some people, don't have bachelor's degrees, some folks are hiring stars, folks who have taken alternative paths to working. And we see that happen a lot in those spaces. And that's why for us, we say it's important for us to remind people that brilliance is not connected to a degree. It's connected to our lived experiences, the things we've chosen to learn about. Okay, manifestation 3 is that you doubt your success or you dismiss a new opportunity. And oftentimes we hear people say, oh, the timing isn't right. Have you all heard that before? Said that, oh, this is not my time yet. It's not my time yet. Well, you have to have some discernment before you say yes, right? You can't say yes to every opportunity. But if you know that it really is not about timing, that you have worked hard, you have the brilliance, and then we distinguish between brilliance and expertise. Expertise is when you've undergone study under a particular topic and you can talk about it for hours. And again, that doesn't necessarily equate to a degree, because some people learn a lot of things from YouTube University. Some people learn a lot of things from certificate-based classes. Some people just learn a lot of things from reading books, right? But you have an amount of knowledge that you could actually teach somebody else about it. And, you've been prepared for this moment, and that's why you're receiving the offer. When someone's give you an opportunity, I can't say this every time because I don't know every person's life, but most of the time people are giving you an opportunity because they believe you're ready for it. They've seen something about you to demonstrate, hey, this person has the capabilities to do this. And the last thing I'm going to talk about before I get into the strategy for releasing imposter syndrome is obsessing over being found out. I don't know if anybody's ever had this experience where you kind of wake up and feel like, I'm going to go to work today and people are going to tell me, oh, I made a mistake. You are not the person for this role. That folks will say, now we thought about this before we put this in the slide and said, what's going on in our country now? People, that might be a real lived experience. But what I mean here is that, like, you have a fear that people will, say to you that you're not the one, that they made a mistake. Does anybody have any questions on these manifestations? I do have time at the end, but I just wanted to make sure I honored that before I moved on to how do we begin to disrupt it. Any questions? Let me check the chat box. Okay, talk to me in the chat box if this is helpful for you, or if you have any questions. I'm willing to slow down. So what I get excited about is whenever you come to one of our open access sessions, you're going to walk away with a tool. You're going to walk away with some sort of framework to help you move on in your leadership. So I'm going to show you 2 ways to address imposter syndrome. One from after the fact. So I've had the moment. Now I want to reflect back on what happened. And then the second one is going to be, what can I do in the moment? There's some overlap. So one of the things that has been really powerful in our coaching is we have people to reflect on when the imposter syndrome is showing up. So you could take these four symptoms that I gave you, and you'll get a handout at the end of the session. And you can ask yourself, when was the last time you participated in this behavior? So for example, if it's second guessing your brilliance. And we ask people who was there. So it could have been, it was Tanya, Latrice, Meryl at the meeting. What happened? I was in the conversation, Tanya said this. Where was it at? Why did you do the behavior? And then what did you notice? And so we have people do this slow down, because what we begin to do is to track what situations are triggering the imposter syndrome. So people then begin to see, oh, it's every time I go into this conversation, or when I go to apply for a new job, or when I'm at my board meeting, this is when it happens to me. And we ask people, what are they noticing, and why they did it, because then it helps us to be able to get folks to see not only the patterns and the triggers, but how to begin to prepare yourself before you go into the meeting or you go into the context. Because I can't control people, right? But I can determine how I pad myself before I go in someplace. And then we use our 4-step consciousness raising process. And this will be on the handout that you get a version of this. If you don't remember all the words, that's fine. But these 4 steps really get you to think about choosing how to use your power, being present by paying attention and noticing what's happening, having a willingness to go deeper to understand, and then being more intentional with how you want to move. So you had the second guessing your brilliance, you've answered the first step. The next part we would say for you to do in your journal in your own time is to tell yourself, like, I can choose to address imposter syndrome. Because you got to choose if you're going to trust yourself to address it, or you're going to let fear keep running rampant in you and you don't try to address it. You'll ask yourself again what behavior was present, but then we want you to ask yourself to go deeper. How does this impact me showing up in my full power? Is it that I'm missing opportunities? Is it that I'm letting, people walk over me? Is it that I leave this meeting feeling icky inside and then I'm sad and I'm dreaming about it, or I'm thinking about it for 7 days after the event has already happened? Because that is having a psychological toll on you, an emotional toll, a physical toll. And we ask people, what's the impact on you? Because when you start to ask people those questions about the impact it's having on them, and really walk them through, like, hey, there's some moves that you can make. People are more aware in the moments when things happen that, hey, I have choices. And so some things we tell people in the moment is to remind yourself of your experiences. Imposter syndrome tries to tell you that you're not enough. You don't have the knowledge, you don't have the experience, that your brilliance is not. But we often help people to do a catalog of the imposter syndrome area and say, okay, when have you actually been successful? Your imposter syndrome keeps showing up, at your one-on-one with your supervisor. And it's usually around, them giving you full autonomy to lead in a particular area of your job. Okay, let's talk about all the times, all the experiences you have where you are leading fully in your area, where you've had success, that we now can go back, one, and speak to your supervisor about, but also where you've had success challenging your supervisor, where you have had success challenging people in authority. Because oftentimes imposter syndrome makes you feel like, one, you have no choices, but two, that you're powerless. And our focus at DCC is all about reminding people of the power that you had before the world told you you had none. The second thing is we tell people to take inventory over what you have control over. Because again, we can't control people, but what is in my locus of control? What do I have control over? And how do I want to use my power in that particular context? So that's if you're taking a reflective. And then if you're just having an experience with imposter syndrome in the moment, like, I'm in the meeting, I'm tired of freezing, you can do two things from this same chart that'll kind of bring you into a reflective moment. Ask yourself this question under your breath: how do I want to use my power? We have found when people have integrated that, it's helped people in the moment to get unfrozen. How many people have ever felt frozen when you feel like the imposter syndrome comes at you? Just kind of feel stuck. But when you ask yourself how you want to use your power, and really remind yourself, like, I can choose not to stay frozen in this moment. I can choose to remember and allow my brilliance to shine. So you would ask yourself the two things you can do in the moment: how do I want to use my power? Remind yourself you can. And then you can just jump right down to the intentionality. In that moment, in that meeting, in that conversation, take inventory of what you have control over. How do I want to use my power in this particular moment? That's the end of my formal piece, because I wanted to make sure I leave some time for questions. I'm going to drop in the chat box for you, though, the QR code if you want to take the assessment to give us some feedback. And then I'm also going to drop in there the handout. But please, I am curious. Any questions? You have me for free coaching for the next 4 minutes. Any questions? And let me hit the end record button so that people's business isn't on our YouTube page. So let me stop the share. Let me stop the recording, and then you can go ahead and give me your questions. Bye-bye, everybody. We're going into private Q&A.